Greetings, ladies and gents, and welcome to this latest edition of Tales from Outer Space, where I take stories from across the internet and read them for your entertainment. This particular story is called The Best Contract Ever, written by Ender's Game 69. This isn't how it went last time, Rowena mumbled as the human came closer to her. Her wings fluttered a little, but the human seemed amused, if anything. How did it go last time? David inquired as he, strangely enough, walked past her towards his liquor cabinet. She watched as he poured 2 glasses of amber liquid and extended one towards her. Rowena took it by reflex, and after he took a sip of his, she did the same, coughing briefly as the burning sensation hit. "Whiskey, it gets better," he promised, after seeing the question in her eyes. "Last time they handed over a child born to someone else," Rowena answered, and a little frown formed on his face. "That's mean. How long ago was that?" David asked. 100 years ago. It's how you make new Fae. It's how I was made," Rowena replied and looked down into the glass. "So you were human once?" he asked. He looked sounded. Is he sad for me?" Rowena wondered. "Yes, but I don't remember that. I would have been given to the Fae on my 9th day of life and made one on the 10th. Rowena answered and took another sip at the same moment David did. "Do you know what they bargained for?" David asked, his head tilted slightly at an angle as he praised the slender, leaf-clad Fae woman. "Life for a sickly infant, life for life. That is a fair bargain," Rowena answered, warmth settling in her stomach. "It must have been hard for them to give you up anyway. But if they didn't," David left the question unspoken in full, but she understood. "Magic hinges on contracts. To break it would have killed the one they wanted to save. I don't mind. I have reached my 100th year, and I'm happy. I do sometimes wonder about the one I was bargained for, but no magic could hope to discern that." Rowena shrugged that off, and David came closer. He placed a delicate kiss on her forehead. "You're wrong about that," he answered. "I can't help but wonder if they were told about you too. The sibling they lost to the Veil of Worlds. The story little believed and much cherished. An ache from which your parents could never heal." "Let me do something for you," David answered. "No bargain, no contract, just a gift from me to the one to save a life precious to me." Rowena blushed and asserted once more, "This is highly irregular." David chuckled. "But it's something I could do before you have my firstborn," he said, and Rowena sucked in her breath. She watched as he went over to the cabinet and took out a box labeled 23andMe, and then returned to her. "Call it a kind of human magic, if you like," he answered. "Just open wide and say, 'ah.'" For reasons she couldn't explain, though her wings fluttered in protest, Rowena abided by his instructions and stared dumbfounded into this rugged face as a white-tipped stick ran along her inner cheek. "Come back again in 2 weeks," he said as he sealed the stick away in a tube. Rowena was in a daze for the next 2 weeks, confused, anxious, and the other Fae couldn't help but notice. Stopping by her treehouse repeatedly, they said, "The first contract is the hardest. In a few 100 years, it'll be easier." Rowena could only nod while she mechanically took care of herself. She couldn't tell the others about David's words or deeds. Not any of them. It was too scandalous. She still blushed red at night, alone and wondering what it might be like, and wondering what his magic would do too. It was a whirlwind in her head from which she could not hide. But time passed as it willed, and she returned again to David's home. She waited at his kitchen table, nervously drumming her fingers on the wooden surface and shifting in the chair until she heard him enter. Every Fae wondered in their childhood about those who gave them up. But with the answer impossible, most set the question aside by their 100th year after knowing that lost ones had to have died. David seemed to offer the impossible. "Ah, good you're here," he said, and held up a tan envelope. "I have the results of your DNA tester. Don't ask, just trust me," he added, and after opening it, he pulled out a few papers. "Your sister is alive. Her name is Sarah Johnson, and she's 102 years old. You also have 2 nieces and 2 nephews." Rowena gasped and brought one hand to her open mouth. "I have numbers here if you'd like me to reach them." David pulled out his phone and waited. Rowena said nothing. Somehow he'd done the impossible. She could only nod. Family to the Fae. That was everything. in part because all of them knew they'd forever lost one family already. David dialed the number. "Is this Sarah Johnson?" he asked. He hit the speaker option, and an old woman's voice answered. "Yes," she said. "Did you have a younger sister born 100 years ago who went missing, given to the Fae?" he asked. "Yes. Who is this?" Sarah asked. "Did you ever wonder about her?" David pressed. "Yes, Our parents died longing to see her. When I was a girl, I used to walk the woods trying to find the Fae to make them give her back. Now please, who is this? How did you get this number? And how did you know about that?" Sarah's voice cracked. Tears began to run down Rowena's cheeks and became pearls as they struck the table surface. "My name is David Marcodi, and I'm sitting in my kitchen across from a girl who you would know as Rowena Johnson, your sister. She's alive, healthy, and if Fae faces read like humans, she'd like to meet you. Would that be all right?" The cry on the phone was shrill and excited. "Oh, please, don't let this be a cruel joke. Yes, by God, I can't travel like I used to, but let me give you my address. Rowena, say something, please," Sarah exclaimed. "Hello, sister. I wondered about you too," Rowena answered. "We'll be there in a 4-hour drive. Will we leave now?" David answered. "You'll take me?" Rowena asked. "Do you know how to use GPS?" he asked pointedly. "No," she replied, her dumbfounded state obvious. "Then, yes," he replied pointedly. "It's a Friday, so it's fine," he promised and held his hand out to her. "Come with me, if you want." Rowena could think of nothing else to do but take his hand, and wanted nothing more than that. A year later, at their wedding, his vow to her before the families of Johnson and Marconi was, "Come with me, if you want." And many were the blessings of the Fae guests who were themselves still finding lost families in the world of man. A year later, as Rowena knew the time has arrived to give life to David's firstborn, she held out her hand to him and said, "Come with me, if you want." Never once in their long lives did either reject the offered hand, and they lived happily ever after. End of story. Story number 2, Human Magic, written by Marilyn of Many. You would think that the life galvanating through space would be an endless string of exciting locations, and mostly you would be right. But sometimes my job on the courier ship is just a job, and occasionally that job sucks. Like most jobs, it sucks when the people do. Today would have been unpleasant enough because of the location, a jungle area thick with plants, fog, and heat. I dislike sweating. I got to do a lot of it today. I also got my hair caught on umpteenth different twigs and branches, completely messing up the braid. But all of that could have been fine if the clients were nice. Nope, snooty little buttheads, the same species as the captain, completely uninterested in acknowledging the rest of us, and ready to argue about the price of the delivery. I stood there beside all the crates we just unloaded, wanting to take a nap on the hover sled, but knowing that it was probably just make the captain look bad. So I just sweated and waited, next to the Frelian twins and Myrrh, all of whom seemed to enjoy the sauna temperatures. The lizardly heat-seekers did too. Lucky me, the only one not either cold-blooded or from a semi-aquatic background. They could have gotten someone else to help with the delivery, but the rest of the crew was busy loading up our next shipment, and I hadn't realized how distasteful this would be. "The items clearly smell rank," argued the lead client, "especially that crate. I can barely stand to be near it." "Once again," said the Captain Sunlight with more patience than most people deserved, "they smelled like that when we accepted them, as I've noted right here, and we traveled with exceptional speed." "I just can't justify paying the full price for a spoiled product." "You are paying for the delivery, not the product." The argument went in circles while I sighed and undid my braid. Might as well fix that while I waited. There wasn't anything else to do. When one of the underlings gave me a glare, I rolled my eyes and stepped behind the Frelians, Blip squared his shoulders and blocked me from sight. How dare I catch their attention with my unsightly mammal fur, I thought, finger combing the leaves out. No appreciation for I'd found a loose hair and also an idea. I tucked the strand into my mouth while I redid the braid, then tied one end of the stray hair to the pen in my pocket and the other to my finger. This was a trick that had gone over well in elementary school. With the fog and the way hair was exotic here, I was curious to see how it did. "Captain," I said politely, stepping forward, "perhaps they would like to pay the full price if we throw in the secret of how I can move small objects with my mind." Captain Sunlight croaked at brow-ridge and played along. "Valuable information," she said. "What do you say?" The clients whispered to each other and argued for a moment, then demanded a demonstration. I happily obliged. With the fog blocking out any traitorous rays of light that could give the game away, I held the pen out in my left hand and made a dramatic flourish with my right. I effected a deep look of concentration, wiggling my fingers in both hands, and I lifted my right, and lo! The pen rose into the air. They bought it. Such goggle-eyed expressions. I had to work not to snort in laughter. Instead, I stood up straight and caught the pen in my left hand, bowing while the clients all talked at once. Captain Sunlight may or may not have known how I'd done that, but she was no fool. She took their payment as quickly as they offered, then managed to usher everyone else back towards the ship without making it look like they were preparing to run. "Go ahead," she said to me. "Share your secret." "It's quite simple," I told them, snapping the hair from my fingers. "All I need is a single strand of human hair." I tossed them the pen and stepped behind the bush while they caught it in surprise. Now they could have chosen to laugh and offer to buy some of my hair. They could have pulled the same trick with their friends and maybe won some bar bets with whatever. They didn't. They made a right call by ducking out of sight. They were yelling from some extremely rude things when Captain Sunlight sped past and leapt onto the hover sled. "Back to the ship," she said. Blop pushed the sled through the undergrowth at a run, and Blip jumping forwards to clear the path. The Mer scrambling up beside the captain. I wasn't small enough to get away with that, so I followed behind Blop and kept my eye out for pursuit. Luckily for us, they decided to stay there and be grumpy instead of chasing after us. They'd gotten what they paid for, after all, even if I'd used slightly more than my mind to move the pen. "That was a great trick," Mer shouted from the sled. "I didn't realize your head tentacles were useful." "So useful," I called back, ducking a branch. "Sometimes they even work on other humans, though they usually figure it out pretty fast." "I appreciate your quick thinking," said Captain Sunlight. "I'll keep it in mind for future negotiations." "As long as they aren't the type to end in violence," I said. I was pretty sure that these guys would fight us about it, but I couldn't be sure. "Oh, they were former crewmates of someone I know," Captain said. "They've always been eggholes." "Great," I said. "I hope they enjoyed the pen. It's almost out of ink." End of story. I'd quickly like to thank the T5 channel members and patrons: Cam Maxwell, Casper Arnholtz, Bushmaster 177, Lord Ashrakal, Ambrose Cattell, Quantum Wednesday, Trixoon WRE, and Blueberry Cat. Thank you very much for the support. It is super appreciated.